Hello, and welcome to Winnow, a couple's close reading of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I'm Owen Gemmer.
I'm Isabella Gemmer. We are married and we love to talk about books together.
And today I am their third. My name is Kyle Prue. Hashtag polyamory. Hashtag polytropos. Question mark?
Bella and I have been on this journey through the entirety of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, reading it book by book. We are right about to start the Odyssey, and we figured we would invite Kyle to talk about this book that he also loves. Kyle and I were friends in high school, and have stayed friends since. So we go back to sort of the teenage Owen and Kyle years, and yeah, we've had English classes together, and we've talked about books a lot. So.
Yeah.
Yes, we have.
And
Our English class in high school was primarily like Owen antagonizing our professor, trying to get him to admit that Jay Gatsby is a narcissist.
Yeah, yeah. I've grown a lot. I've changed a lot since then, but those classes were very instrumental in my development of kind of my love of reading and thinking and talking about books with other people.
Mhm. and I'm just grateful to listen to someone else's thoughts about the Odyssey because I can talk to him anytime I want.
Cool. So Kyle, can you kind of just start by sharing what is it about the Odyssey that strikes you and when you've read it in your life and how it's spoken to you throughout your life?
Yeah, definitely. So, I'm also very excited to be here because I don't know anybody in my life who wants to talk about the Odyssey. Although recently my girlfriend was like, "Could you at some point describe like lay out the entire Odyssey for me?" And I was like, "Oh my God, it's finally happening." But so I first read the Odyssey in sort of a truncated version in fifth grade. They gave us a truncated version of the Odyssey in my English class in fifth grade. And then over the course of the next 4 years, I went to four different schools. And every single school that I got to, they happened to be reading the Odyssey. And so I read the Odyssey like probably like five times within, my sort of like young, like teenage years. And all different versions, different translations, and like twice at our high school, randomly enough. It was like in two different of my sort of curriculums, like between like English and Latin and all that. So I had read it a ton growing up, just over and over and over and over again. So I always felt like I knew it better than I knew maybe like any other like great, work of literature. And then as I started to grow older, it would be kind of something where if I ever felt like I didn't, like I needed to like return to zero, return to stasis, or break like a reading slump, that would sort of be the story I would return to. And so, yeah, and I feel like it's one of the most kind of like widely like speculated upon and adapted, sort of, pieces ever. So there's sort of no limit to how much you can read about it or find about it. And so yeah, it's kind of always been a big part of my, development.
That's great. Yeah, and so you seem to go straight to Homer rather than like most people our generation who kind of started with Percy Jackson and then were like, oh, let's get into the real stuff. You just went like
Yeah.
straight into the deep end.
So I was such a big Greek mythology person as a like child. It was
Hmm.
like all I would read, and I would read from like like the textbooks, like somebody's Greek myths or
Yeah.
whatever. And now I have the Stephen Fry versions. I have all those now and all that. But like I would so like when Percy Jackson came along, even like as a fourth grader, I was like, this seems not entirely accurate. So I mean, like, love Percy Jackson. My friends have a Percy Jackson podcast that I've been on like 100 times, but I think that yeah, like by the time I got to the Odyssey, I was like, oh, this is kind of the more like I would say like grown up
Mhm.
version of what I've been reading all this time. Because I think that like when you read the whatever the like list of great myths, they don't really put like Troy and the Odyssey in there, you know?
There's something about the Odyssey also that thematically lends itself to being reread multiple times throughout your life. And we can talk about, polytropos more later, but there's something about Odysseus's character where he's many faceted. He's always changing, but there is like a core center self that he's trying to return to, obviously, and like the whole homecoming thing. But like he as a person is like grounded but also changing. And so like that's really like it's reassuring for a person like growing and changing through life, I think, where like because I recognize in myself that like, I might be a different person than I was even yesterday, but there is like continuity to the self. Yeah, and that just always like that's one of the reasons it's my favorite. Like, and you can reread it like all the time and always find something that like speaks to you. So,
Yeah, and not to like navel gaze too hard, but I think that there was an element of like going to new schools every year and being the
mm,
new kid every single year and continually reading this book about this guy who's like going place to place. And
yeah.
like I think that like so like ultimately like like being an adult and like like moving a lot and going from place to place, like yeah, it really does feel like yeah, I mean, like it's sort of like that is, I think, the interest I've kept in it is returning to this character.
Mhm.
And like now as an adult, like reading the versions of it where they're like, hey, he's actually like kind of a super fucked up guy. And like I think it's really kind of like it feels like something that has always kind of been at reach, but also has kind of eluded me,
Mhm.
which I think, makes it, yeah, like you said, something you can continually kind of return to.
Yeah, because I think obviously people also cite this as like, the first hero's journey. And I think if you take Joseph Campbell's formulation, it doesn't map on directly, but like again, still that core story of like somebody on some journey that is both a literal physical journey of, adventures and conquering monsters and things like that, but that the bigger out external journey is a reflection of the internal journey. Like that is the core story here
Mm.
too. And so in the same way that all those stories speak to us, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, all these kinds of things, yeah, it hits at that same, human desire to like adventure and become better and, grow as a person.
Yeah, but it also so like it's not a there and back again story,
Hmm.
which I like to emphasize to people. It's not like, in The Hobbit, classic. Like he doesn't have a call to adventure to go out, experience new things, and then return home.
Hmm.
Like it is all a return home, right? It's
Yeah.
all it's all anticlimax almost action.
It's kind of a refusal to call, refusal to call, refusal to call, refusal to call, refusal to call. Like just like everywhere he goes, he's like, "Come on, man."
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, since you've read so many different versions, do you have like a favorite translation or version that you return to, or yeah, what's your relationship with different translations and things like that been?
I think that I've like read a variety of them. I don't have one that I think stands like way head and shoulders above the others. I think that like, I think that outside of the like Ho Homeric version, I think that the thing that I maybe most strongly gravitate to is Madeline Miller's book Circe.
Hmm.
I think is a really kind of interesting portrait of Odysseus
And very
because
negative.
very negative,
Yeah.
yeah, and but I think at the same time too, um, remains very complicated because it is painted through only the perception of people who clearly by the end are like didn't know this guy at all, I don't think. Something that I think that like I think it really like added a lot of texture to then my like, like Emily Wilson reading.
Hmm.
Because something that I think that that book kind of seems to imply that I like think is really interesting is the idea that Odysseus is kind of the first person in ancient Greek to get a hold of subtext.
Hmm.
Like he is the first person who is able to say something he doesn't mean,
Yeah.
really, to a degree. Like I think like when he is at Troy, there's this giant kind of argument for who's going to be greatest of the Greeks. And he just kind of sits back and lets everybody eat it.
Yeah.
Like he just like lets all of the like true like noble shiny heroes like completely blow it and get themselves killed. And like one of the things that she kind of paints is this like kind of like wry, kind of like self-deprecating humor that he has.
Hmm.
And like, when Penelope shows up in that book, she's like, none of that shit's real. Like this guy was so deeply obsessed with himself. And like it was the first thing that I think ever kind of was like gave me the tools to be able to reckon with this moment where he like yells to Polyphemus and he's like, never mind, I'm not nobody at all. I'm Odysseus. Like here's my name and address.
Hmm.
And like, I think whenever I read that moment, I was like, this doesn't seem to me, it seemed so much dumber than the character seems to be
Mm.
throughout the whole, like everything you read about him. It's like the first moment where I was like, damn, like dumb move. And I think that to a degree, like that book helped me reckon with the fact that like this is a guy who is like constantly lying, like constantly shifting, like constantly measuring everything, constantly thinking about his legacy,
Hmm.
like constantly thinking about his role in the great kind of fabric of like ancient Greek mythology and history and
Hmm.
destiny. And like I think that was like to me now I'm like, oh, this is the moment where he's like thinking about like the history books being written. And he's like, ah, awesome. What a great little trick that was. Like,
Hmm.
I can't let that get, washed away with the sand.
Yeah, I don't think that people read Odysseus as like sneaky enough. Like I think we think, oh, he's a smart guy. I think that's most people's perception is like, this is a smart guy who's evaluating and analyzing. But he also is always lying and he's always thinking, what can I say that will make like this situation go in my favor? Yeah, and but like constantly. Like I don't think people look for that enough in the text when he'll like think to himself like, and now I will say a lie.
Yeah, there's a really great moment in Circe where Penelope is talking about how, everyone talks about Odysseus's PTSD
Mhm.
or whatever. And she says like, I'm from Sparta. I have known old soldiers my whole life. I know how they shake. I know how they hear the trumpets and they freak out. That's not him.
Yeah.
Like if there was a loud noise, he was the first one with a sword in his hand. Like the implication that he was this, sort of like, like at the end, like this kind of like old tired man. Like he was like a killing machine. Like he was just more clever than everyone around him. And he like really like understood how to use that to like, yeah, I mean like enter Troy, like end the Trojan War, like survive all this stuff, notably alone. But yeah, sort of, I mean, highs and lows. We have reasons to like, reason to dislike.
Yeah, and I think actually like my noting of the hero's journey, I actually think that that mentality that I have somewhat embraced is actually detrimental, right? Because the hero's journey, when we think about, the kid stories and, The Hobbit and Lord of, those kinds of things, they're kind of overwhelmingly positive. We're supposed to just purely root for the character, but Odysseus is much more complex. Like there are a lot of things where you're like, whoa, like is this guy like a good person?
Mhm.
And you have to continually question it. And so I think in many ways, actually, like in the same book, we both start the genre of kind of the hero's journey, but also defy it at its core because he is also kind of an anti-hero. And that is what's interesting about Madeline Miller's is that it kind of leads much more into the anti-hero, even verging on just like villain,
Yeah, yeah.
archetype rather than the just like hero adventurer kind of thing that, yeah, that I think the popular culture sometimes, and myself included, can get sort of too caught up in.
I think about when he like when he basically like scams all the Phaeacians out of like a ship and a bunch of gold just to get back home. He does lose it all again, but like where in the hero's journey do we root for the main character to scam a whole kingdom out of gold and a ship just to lose it all again? Like I don't remember that part of the hero's journey,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, I think like yeah, and it's interesting too. Like Madeline Miller's is I would say probably the most negative that I've read, but it also does come from the like the mouths of people who knew him primarily after he was like like thoroughly like destroyed and traumatized from his entire like journey through the Odyssey. But the one thing that I thought like the thing that I can't seem to grasp from that telling of it is the idea where, when they're calling Odysseus to Troy, he acts crazy. And they're like, oh, yeah, sorry, he went crazy. He's a crazy guy. No, he can't go to Troy. He's got to stay here. And so Agamemnon, I think, or maybe
Hmm.
it's,
No, it's
yeah, it's
Agamemnon. Yeah.
Agamemnon's like, great, put his kid in front of the plow. And if he's really truly crazy, he'll plow right over the kid. And Odysseus is like, all right, all right, you got me. Let's go. And Madeline Miller supposes through Penelope that he devised that trick as something easy to see through so that the next time he laid a trick, people would think that he was dumber than he was. Like
Mm.
the idea that like he made a big show of being caught for one of his like wily little, schemes so that it would make people underestimate how actually tricky and devious he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
like
reading
that.
that, you're like, oh man, like
Yeah.
like the idea of Odysseus is like a sixth dimensional chess player.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's also important, like even in the original Homeric text, that like in the Iliad, like Odysseus kind of does war crimes, right? Like they
Yeah.
like sneak into the enemy's camp in the middle of the night, they kill a bunch of sleeping people, they've captured a prisoner, the prisoner is begging for mercy, and they just decapitate him. It's like, oh yeah, like no, Odysseus hasn't this whole time been
Yeah.
the upstanding hero. Like he's doing the same thing that all these people are doing in war and being super brutal and very sneaky at the same time. And in many ways, he gets away with things that other people don't get away with because he's so sneaky and smooth talking and yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, in that scene in the Iliad, it's like implied that he invents lying. Like when he's got this guy like, got the sword to his neck and he's like, "Tell me da 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 da, tell me the information and I won't kill you."
Right.
The guy tells him the information and then he kills him. Like that. And like I think at the time that was like shocking. Like no one had ever thought about doing the opposite of what they said.
Yeah.
And especially not somebody who is, yeah, like vying to be the greatest of all the, Greek heroes. Also, I don't know if this is in the Odyssey or in the Iliad. I guess you guys have been through it like a million times, so perhaps you will know. But there's a moment in Song of Achilles where there's this guy who's like basically sowing a lot of dissent in the Greek camp. And, Achilles basically kind of talks them out of it. He's like, no, no,
Hmm.
no, like this is still great or whatever. And right after that meeting that they have, the guy who was like sowing all this dissent, Odysseus has him beaten into like weeks of unconsciousness.
Hmm.
Like it becomes kind of clear that within the camp, he is like working politics for Agamemnon, essentially, which is like another kind of like grody kind of weird. Like he's a little bit like what's like the majority whip in
Yeah.
Congress.
Yeah.
He's kind of like turning the votes a little bit, like through, like brute force and violence.
Yeah, that scene is in the Iliad very early on. It's in like book two. And I think there are many ways in which it's even more brutal because when this guy, I think his name was Thersites, is basically saying like, yeah, we should all leave. We should just like go home and avoid this. Odysseus's first argument against him is just to emphasize how ugly this dude is. And it
Yeah.
goes into this like long, like half-page description about how ugly he is and how untrustworthy he is. And then he's like, I'm beautiful. You should listen to me. Here's my argument against it. And
Yeah.
just absolutely demolishes this guy publicly. Yeah, and I
Yeah, I
think,
think even the narration says,
yeah,
and then the ugliest guy in the camp spoke.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So we've danced around a lot of these things. So one of our goals for this episode is to read the first 10-ish lines of the Odyssey, which sort of form the invocation to the Muse. I say 10-ish because different translations, might do it. It's 10 lines in the original Greek. And we'll talk through kind of the main themes that this introduction sets up and what Homer is trying to tell us at the very beginning about who Odysseus is and what his journey has been like. So since you mentioned the Emily Wilson, I'll read her translation of this, and then we can, if we need to, look at other translations of terms and things like that. So, tell me about a complicated man. Muse, tell me how he wandered and was lost when he had wrecked the holy town of Troy, and where he went and who he met, the pain he suffered in the storms at sea, and how he worked to save his life and bring his men back home. He failed to keep them safe, poor fools. They ate the sun god's cattle, and the god kept them from home. Now, goddess, child of Zeus, tell the old story for our modern times. Find the beginning. So, the first thing that always stands out about this is the adjective that is used to describe Odysseus in the first line. So, the Greek term is polytropos, but it is translated many, many different ways, and it really forms a core understanding of who Odysseus is. Do you want to talk about your understanding of polytropos, Kyle, and whatever
Yeah. I have it here.
that is?
Yeah. So I think, yes. I mean, it's very compelling, and I think like you're saying, it's interesting, and it's great that it's in the first line because within the first line, you get to see how everybody is coming at this. Like the word itself, polytropos, of many turnings. But the word has no direct translation in English, so everybody takes it differently. What does it mean to call somebody of many turnings? Emily Wilson says complicated man,
Hmm.
and so it very much seems like okay, like from the first line, like this is your perspective of Odysseus,
Hmm.
complicated man. And in some of these other ones, we have cunning hero. You could tell this is going to be a little bit more of an exaltation, a little
Hmm.
bit. And then you have man of twists and turns. I think Owen first saw that I had it on online, you said man of many ways.
Hmm.
It's yeah, and so I think that that word is kind of like the fixture around which to a degree you can tell how a translator is going to tell this story.
Hmm.
And what I'm also seeing here, like also, Emily Wilson has the holy town of Troy, and then we have Hollowed Heights of Troy from the Robert Fagles version. Like it's also interesting to determine how someone's going to talk about Troy in relation to, Odysseus's destruction of it.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, so I have the word on my, like right under my collarbone here. And I got it back in 2021 or 2022. Yeah, I think I got it in 2021, wherein I had just moved to Los Angeles and I only had one other tattoo. And my friend called me and she was like, there's this great visiting tattoo artist. I have a tattoo booked with him. I have a second tattoo booked with him. My friend just dropped out. She can't go. Would you want to go get one of his tattoos? Here's his like sheet of, images that he can do. And so she sends over the sheet of images, and I was like, it's not, it might not really be my style. But she was like, he's got like this really kind of like unique handwriting. Like he can write on skin in a really kind of like interesting way. And I was looking at it and I was like, oh yeah, I do really like the way he writes. And she was like, he says you can get a word if you want. And so, pick a word. And I was like, to get a single word on your body is a very kind of like complicated sort of task.
Hmm.
Mhm. And so I was like thinking about it all night. I had maybe like, 12 hours in between like getting this, a trial and then having to, execute in the moment to pick a word. And so I was thinking on it and I kept thinking, I was like, and so eventually I was like, maybe don't want a word in English. I don't want like, what bravery or whatever,
Yeah.
like something stupid. So I was like, okay, like what's something that maybe is a little bit out of reach, something. And then I was like, what about a word that in general means complicated of many ways? Like there was something about it that I really, really, really related to or spoke to me throughout my life. And so I was like, what if I'll get the Greek word. And so I was like, what if I get polytropos? But then I was like, I do not want to get the Chinese character problem where it's not right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so I think like pretty late at night, I should have called you on, but I called John Stifler, who was in the final years of,
Yeah.
classic study at Penn. And I said, I have an ancient Greek emergency. And he said, you have no idea how long I've been waiting to get this call. And so I wrote the word out for him. He looked at it and he was like, he did have one little thing. He's like, this line is a little short. You want to like lengthen that a little bit. And I brought it to the tattoo artist the next day, and he was like, "Yeah, great, yeah, this works." And so I had it permanently etched into my body, and that it's actually to this day, I think I have like about like 9 or 10 tattoos. It's definitely my favorite, because I think that it's like the simplest, but also um, I like that the meaning of this word, just like the meaning of Odysseus, just it kind of exists just a little bit out of range.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And like it's something that like I think like I like still grapple with. But I think in the moment I had like lived in LA for like a couple months, I didn't really know anybody. It was such like a weird time for me. So I was like, the one thing that the one quality that I think like stood to be admirable to me about Odysseus was the fact that no matter what situation he ended up in, he very much has to kind of trust his wings rather than trust the branch.
Mhm.
Like he had
Mhm.
to like I think like consistently, yeah, like escape challenges, like dominate challenges. And so like there was an element to it where I was like, I think that despite everything else that maybe is to be said about his war crimes, that is the one kind of trait about him that I find to be admirable. And I think that is like the only person who could conquer the Odyssey is someone who has as many, twists and turns as it does.
Mhm.
Like I think like that is what I think is like to me the thing that speaks the most to me about the story is the fact that so much weird stuff is being thrown at this guy and he's the only one who could survive it because he is the only one who has enough weird shit in him to be able to pull from.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
So
the constant the constant reinvention of the self in every
yeah.
single moment. And like, what does this situation recall for, like need from me? How am I responding? How is that going to affect me long term? He doesn't think about that maybe too much, and then he just kind of keeps going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Belle and I often like to talk about like if one day we did a translation of the Odyssey, like what would we do for this word?
Hmm.
And I always go back to I like the multifaceted man because I think at least the face like multi-face is part of that and like the way he is changing his face all the time, both sometimes literally like in
Hmm.
disguise and other times more metaphorically in terms of like who he appears to be to other people. The only problem with it is that it uses like multifaceted as a Latin root instead of a Greek. And so some people get like really up in arms about like, no, you can't use Latin root words and these kinds
Yeah,
of
yeah.
things. But
Someone in my sophomore English class at St. John's, when we were translating it, we translated chunks of the Odyssey in that class, and he translated it as a man of many machinations. And that,
Mm,
because you get the alliteration, like 3 times. And like, I just like the word machinations a lot. And
yeah.
I think yeah, that's my favorite.
the man of many machinations. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that like one of the things that I always was talking to my parents about when I like first started living in LA was that I was like, I had said like essentially like I was like, this is a place where you really have to know how to recognize a trap.
Mm,
Like there are a lot of things that can just sort of like suck your life away, and they're kind of everywhere. And like equal and opposite to the entertainment industry, there is a industry of people trying to take advantage of people who want to be in entertainment,
mhm,
And
Hmm.
so I think that like one of the things that like while I was there, I was like I was constantly trying to like remind myself to stay wise to what a trap is. And so the Odyssey was very much on my mind at this time, which
Hmm.
is why getting this as well was a little bit of me being like, keep your wits about you,
mhm,
like be able to recognize, whatever the lotus flowers,
Hmm.
the things that are sort of, invented to, whatever, ensnare you.
Hmm.
And so I think, yeah, like it to a degree, like also like it seems like yeah, of many machinations is very good. Like he didn't let his guard down very often because you wouldn't either if you were him, probably.
Yeah. So I think the next thing in this invocation that sticks out to me as a main theme is the idea, right? It talks about he sacked the sacred town of Troy, but then, speak of the cities he saw, the mines he grasped, or language about that, like his travels and all of the different kinds of people he met and the kinds of, the minds he came into contact with. And you've already talked about how like this story stood out to you as you were moving from schools and things like that. And so what do you think this book has to say about, travel and meeting new people and how that changes us?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that there's an element to which, um, yeah, he enters into every single new situation with, I think, like a nice face on. Like he is, I think, to a degree, Odysseus is a friendly guy, but I think that he never fully clicks off the part of his brain that's ready for things to go south.
Mhm.
To a degree, I don't. This is just the thing I read most recently, so it's in my head most kind of. It's the strongest fixture that I have right now. But Madeline Miller says he seemed ready to parry a spear out of the dark
Mm,
That's
when
good.
he's in bed.
yeah.
Like he and I think that when you're anywhere other than with your back to a wall in your home, there's a degree to which I think that you should have that mechanism running. Like I don't think we like when you're traveling, when you're like out in the world and everything, like I think that like the tourist in general is it like within I think like media and within literature is kind of like a dumb, vulnerable creature.
Hmm.
And so I think that like what you have to kind of hold to is is the idea that like I'm able to recognize a trap,
Hmm.
essentially.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting to me is the ways in which Odysseus, in some ways, conforms to the sort of pervading Greek notions of how to be a guest, but also sometimes manipulates them in
Yeah.
his favor. Because, right, like there's this really strong sense of anybody visiting you could be a god in disguise, and so you should treat any stranger, welcoming them, giving them gifts. It's the host's duty to provide gifts for the visitor, and Odysseus knows that. And right, sometimes he is just like a normal good guest, but other times he kind of uses that to his advantage, and kind of, yeah, can manipulate it. And so he's always, again, like right on the border of what is socially acceptable and expected of him, and also what is going to sort of help him get the advantage.
Yeah. And I think to a degree as well, there is an element to which I have found through travel, which is that if you are good at showing reverence, if you are good at the act of submission, it is very, very, very unlikely that you will be treated cruelly. I think that like there is to it or like scammed or anything like that. I think there's a degree to which these sort of like things are set up for people who are more arrogant when abroad.
Hmm.
And yeah, like I think that in general, yeah, like that action of being like anybody could be a god. When you're anywhere, you should show reverence to the people of that place because even anywhere you go they in someone else's house they kind of are God, very much like he sort of developed this kind of thing like you get somewhere you kind of learn the land,
Hmm.
very much like I feel like that's with Cersei's Island, Iea, like it's very
Hmm.
much so like the people who just traipse right up to the house and knock on the door are the ones who get turned into pigs.
Yeah.
He's Odysseus is like, let me stay behind and read the travel guide.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's also what gets him into trouble with Polyphemus, right? Like they are on the beach. They don't have to sort of go up into the island, but he's like, no, I want to explore. I want to sort of get to know who's here. And that's what eventually gets them trapped and leads to a bunch of people dying. And so there are, right, there are ways in which his sort of desire to sort of know the land is really beneficial because it keeps him aware. And other times, yeah, where it like really gets in his way, where he's kind of like too presumptuous. Like, oh yeah, I can just waltz in and just like, people treat me kindly. And
Mhm.
yeah.
The thing that I always like to bring up whenever anybody wants to talk about the Cyclops, a reminder that the story of the Cyclops interaction is right is Odysseus telling that story within the story. So he's telling that story to the Phaeacians who are people who have taken him in as a guest friend. Um, and I like to read it with that like meta, commentary, because I do think he's kind of saying, like, yeah, this is a situation where maybe I wasn't the best guest friend, but this, ungodly Cyclops was not the best host to me. And look what I did to him. I stabbed him in his only eye.
Mm,
And so maybe you listening to this story, like, because he's always trying to, like,
yeah.
so yeah, maybe he's trying to tell them, potentially, you should treat me with, a lot of kindness, and send me off with gifts so that I don't stab
I
you in your eye, you know?
I kind of like the degree to which, yeah, I like that reading of it that he's basically saying, I'm not a guy you really want to fuck with.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I
wow.
I think because
Yeah.
he comes to the Phaeacians, like, like we've been talking about, very submissive.
Mhm.
Like that's basically when he approaches Nausicaa out in the field, because he's essentially naked. He's in the worst situation possible. He's a strange man who's naked, who's just washed up on their island. And he does the most submissive thing possible. He gets his way all the way into the, center of the castle to the king. And then he tells this story about how he absolutely annihilated this guy. And yeah, the irony there, I think, is great.
That
Either
like, yeah, that recontextualizes it a little bit. You're like, oh yeah, right. Yeah, he's a little bit like, yeah, he's a little bit, yeah, like speaking to his own defense.
Yeah, because and we can you can read this with a sort of like unreliable narrator lens of like how much of the story that he is telling is him crafting versus what actually happened.
Yeah, because all of the what we think of as like the more fantastical elements of the story happen when he is telling that part of his journey to the Phaeacians. All the monster interactions happen in that section. So it's like a little bit like I like to believe
Yeah.
it's real. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's truth wrapped in a lie, essentially, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think there's a degree to which also like that is what I was to at a point like scared about with Christopher Nolan.
Mm,
Like in being like the only person I think on the planet who could get the blank check to make this film. I don't think anybody else could have justified the production budget to
Hmm.
pull something that's like kind of famously unadaptable. But also at the same time, him being the only one being able to do this, also like when I heard it being like, oh, Christopher Nolan is a guy who hates effects and hates fantasy.
Yeah.
And like, like I think like a big kind of critique of like Inception was the fact that it's like you think that all dreams are people standing around in cities, like very like kind of like gray washed like interiors of like buildings and like everybody wearing suits, like very form like that like his interpretation of dream setting or dreamscape in general was such a kind of like a sterile thing, like a
mhm,
like a like a business casual kind of like
Hmm.
existence that this man lives.
Yeah.
And so there's a degree to which I saw the very first teaser, which is with John Bernthal as Menelaus, basically talking to Tom Holland, Telemachus, who's just basically saying like, like who has a story about Odysseus? Anybody here got a story about Odysseus? Like, you think he's in prison? There's not a prison on the planet that can hold Odysseus. And then
Hmm.
they show Odysseus in the ocean.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's the prison that can hold Odysseus. That's a very good and interesting, thing like image to have here.
Hmm.
But my concern was that when he's sort of saying like, who here has a story about Odysseus? My concern was that he was going to kind of take like the Troy approach and essentially say like, here is the actual story of the real guy that all, and like
mm,
the
Hmm.
Cyclops is just going to be some kind of like jacked guy with one eye. Like this, like I think like this is a thing that like annoys me to no end within, like adaptation of mythology is when
mhm.
they're like, none of that stuff's real. And then they
Mhm.
asked Nolan about it, and he was like, well, the gods are very real to them. They're present in natural phenomenon. And I was like,
Yeah,
well, no,
yeah,
no, like he's gonna
yeah,
fuck it. But then I saw the most recent teaser, and there's an image of the Cyclops, and you can see it's kind of a forced perspective-y type thing. And then you can see a scene from the underworld, and I was kind of like, okay, like
yeah, yeah,
like he is at least going to shoot it.
Mhm.
I think the thing that I think I have sometimes trouble with in the Odyssey is the idea that it's like the implication that like, oh yeah, all of this really happened, but
yeah,
our version of it is maybe a little bit more fantastical. I think that like I do think you want to see the myth in its full
Mhm.
glory.
hmm
Especially if this for whatever the next like 50 years is going to be the way in which like people who have no familiarity with mythology in general are like, I know the Odyssey,
yeah, yeah,
like living in LA for the next 20 years, like film guys are going to tell me that they love the Odyssey, and
yeah,
I'm going to have to be like, what do you mean? Like,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah, I think all of those concerns are valid, right? Like if the gods are just like normal-ish people, like obviously one of the interesting things is that the gods sometimes are in disguise as normal people and sometimes they are in other forms and how will he play with that? And right, we don't want Poseidon just to be a wave that like a voice comes out of because like what? Like that's,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I had this, I remember, I think we talked about this fear that like at the end, like Odysseus makes it back home and no longer needs Athena's, help or guidance, like, to symbolize the end, Odysseus was gonna be having a conversation with Athena, and then, he turns to say one last thing to her, but she's gone. Like something like that, where it's like, oh, she was
Yeah.
in his head the whole time. Like if something like that happens,
Boom.
well, it'll be the end of the movie and I'll walk out, I guess.
Yeah. I
Yeah, stuff
yeah,
like that.
I think that the like kind of like modern cinematic obsession with realism and like obsession with like, the mind
hmm
is just annoying. Like it feels unconfident. Like what I mean to be like, oh, like all this was in his he's crazy from the sea or whatever. It's like
hmm
have we not said enough about the human mind and how, like the ways in which one can deceive oneself? Like it's this is all like, like Fight Club and its
Mhm.
Yeah,
implications
yeah.
and A Beautiful Mind and its implications.
hmm
Yeah. Yeah, and it's even similar to like the Baz Luhrmann Gatsby, where it's like, oh, we put Nick in an insane asylum and now he's reflecting why. Like the story's
Yeah.
interesting enough on its own as it is. Like we don't need to like add these extra layers of meta commentary. Like the story is really, really good
hmm
as it is, and so
Well, like the story already has meta commentary,
because it's
right?
layered and
Because it's
yeah.
like Odysseus starting from like the end of the journey, kind of, and then he goes back and he tells the story up to that point. Then it picks up again. Then he get like it already has so much going on. It's already rearranged and not told chronologically,
Mhm.
which at least is one of the reasons. That's why I thought maybe Christopher Nolan was kind of attached to maybe, making this adaptation because he loves to do stuff out of order. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, one of my interesting things is like I've been brainstorming other ways to make the Odyssey out because he's gonna try to pull something new, I feel like. He's gonna rearrange it
Yeah.
in his own way. And like, how is he gonna do that? Which I'm both excited and concerned for. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that what's really interesting about seeing the way that a movie comes together, the way that things get packaged, is you start to get actors attached once the director is attached and has the project, and then that's reported in trades. And something that was really, really interesting to me was so many actors before the actual premise was announced of Christopher Nolan's new film, signing on without having read anything, without knowing like what exactly he was going to do. And more than often, the director has to come out and say, "This is the story, and I'm interested in it because of blank." And so, but we didn't get that. We got like Tom
Mhm.
Holland being like, "Yeah, he came over to my house, he said what it was, and I said I'd do it."
Yeah,
and
that's what
so
made
many
me ask
people
as
coming
well.
through, and we were all like, what could this possibly be? And maybe it was just because of Oppenheimer being the last thing that he was like, anybody will just do anything he asks. Like, like anyone's like, yeah, yeah, whatever. I'll do anything you want. I remember Matt Damon had told his wife, I'm taking a 2-year break from acting unless Christopher Nolan calls. And like 3 days later, Christopher Nolan called and said, "Do you want to be an Oppenheimer?" And he said yes. And then now. And so like seeing this kind of like steamrolling and people being and like people signing on without having an understanding of what he's doing, not having the script, not having like, and I was like, what could this possibly be? And especially Oppenheimer being a $90 million movie that made billions of dollars and being like, all right, like they're gonna let him do the biggest thing ever. And then them announcing it's the Odyssey. And I was like, oh, like,
Yeah.
because I think like the thing that I want to know more than anything, which I think like they're smart in keeping it close to the vest, is what is your interest in this story?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Like, what speaks to you about the Odyssey?
Hmm.
And like, there's a lot of different ways into that. And so like I think like the curiosity that remains for me, kind of like you were saying, like is his interest in it the fact that it's nonlinear? That like we like kind of start with Telemachus, start with people kind of going around like trying to get information about where this guy is, like his story of it all. Um, I am, yeah, like hoping to God that his interest in it is not, centered around the idea of like the myth as a thing that gets exaggerated,
Mhm.
Hmm.
which I feel like is the most obvious and like most reachable thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one theme that we haven't really talked about yet that is really present in Odyssey, and that I do think is present in a lot of Nolan's movies that I think he does well, is this idea of like homecoming and sort of like what does it mean to, yeah, like go on an adventure and return home and be changed.
Hmm.
Because I think obviously, you know, Interstellar does that really well. Batman does it to an extent, like how is he changed when, he goes out and comes back. And so I'm curious, just do you have thoughts about that in the Odyssey and sort of how those questions about what it means to return home play in the Odyssey and then maybe even how Nolan might deal with them?
That's a great point. I hadn't even considered that at all, but you're right. It's in Interstellar to a large degree. He shows up and everybody's old.
And Dunkirk is sort of
Like
that way, like, yeah, like how are
yeah,
we all gonna
yeah.
get home?
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, there's a degree to which also like you can tell that like there's a lot of criticism, I think, about the way that Christopher Nolan writes women because he's always killing off the women. He's like even like Inception has like a dead wife character who is
Hmm.
the dead wife even throughout the entire film and like only exists to a degree to be alive. And but I think like a lot of people have also posited the possibility that Christopher Nolan just loves his wife so much that the worst thing he can imagine happening to a person is their wife dying. Like,
Hmm.
his wife is his producing partner, like also won the Oscar alongside him for Oppenheimer. Like I think like that to a degree is like something like interesting. So the idea of maybe like being like, all right, you have to keep the wife alive but they're separated. Like it could be a degree to which like Christopher Nolan is just a humongous wife guy,
Hmm.
and like the degree to which like so much of this like homecoming element is about. I mean, like the idea of like also when you work on a film, you're gone for 4 to 6 months, and your whole family somewhere else. And like I think like you do see this theme come up a lot in film because filmmakers in general are people who are oftentimes away from their families. Um, but yeah, I think that it's an interesting point that this is present in a lot of his work. Like a lot of his work is about yeah, the homecoming as it happens. And it seems like, he's got a really large interest in what's going on at home. I mean like uh casting Robert Pattinson as
I think it's
Antinous,
perfect.
it's awesome. I
Yeah.
mean like
Yeah,
he loves to play a little freak
yeah,
Yeah.
and like when they cast Robert Pattinson, you're like, Hermes gotta
yeah,
be, right? Like there's no way it's not. And then you get Antinous dropped on you and you're like,
yeah,
oh, he actually does give a about what's happening at Ithaca.
yeah.
And
I'm
like, yeah,
so
I mean, like,
excited. to see
No,
Robert
go ahead.
Pattinson and Tom Holland play off each other because Telemachus and Antinous are
Yeah.
somewhat like foils for each other in that case. And I don't think they've acted together in a movie. They both acted with Zendaya a bunch, but I don't yeah, like I'm excited to see their chemistry and the way that yeah, Robert Pattinson plays the little freak and Tom Holland
Yeah.
plays the trying to like be the good boy and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to ask you guys about, which is
Mhm.
something that I have had maybe like like a thing that keeps kind of like looping around in my head, wherein that like all these people start signing on and then they reveal it's the Odyssey. And you're like looking at this cast list and you're like, who is Odysseus then?
Mhm.
You know, like I heard someone say Tom Holland's Odysseus, and I said, you need to shut up and stop talking current, like immediately. But like looking through this, being like, okay, like kind of like crossing off like left and right and being like, who is the only person here who can play this old enough? And you're like, it's Matt Damon. And like I feel like, Matt Damon has had a great career and is a great actor, but there was a degree to which I was like, really? Like this is our most kind of like nuanced, like layered mythic character
Mhm.
like ever, maybe. And like seeing it in a little bit being like, okay, he's from Boston. Like our Odysseus is from Boston. A little bit was like, I was like, I'm willing to be blown away by the performance. Was there was a little bit of a degree to which I was like, oh, huh, all right,
Mhm.
maybe. I hope it's awesome.
Yeah. He might be at the, because Odysseus appears at certain times to be like younger, brighter, and shinier, because Athena makes him that way. And then when he approaches, trying to, get himself back into Ithaca, he's really old. And I think Matt Damon's probably at that age where it's like easy to make him look like spiffy in some scenes and like kind of haggard in others.
Mhm.
So that was one positive I thought about his casting.
Yeah. And you see very often that Nolan is a guy who just like likes to work with the same people over and over again.
Mhm.
So you look through like the rest of his movies and you're like, I guess this is the guy who he has,
Hmm.
like in his stable who is, and it like, but I was like, oh, maybe like, I don't know, like it's a little bit of it to a degree, like they need him like bulky enough to be a warrior, but they need him, like smart. Like there's a degree
Mhm.
to which there was an element to when I saw John Bernthal cast, I was like, John Bernthal? But then finding out he's Menelaus, being like, of course, this is the king of
Yeah.
the Spartans.
Yeah.
Like, of course, like, yeah, I don't know.
I will say Matt Damon's performance in The Martian gives me hope because I think there's a decent similarity between those characters, or at least again the archetype of like solo man who is both kind of like physically capable but also intellectually capable. And again, this like balance of sort of like witty optimism, like I'm laughing my way through the pain, and also like this is awful and I hate everything about this. I think The Martian does pretty well with that, and so I think that gives me at least some hope that Matt Damon already has kind of enough experience playing that kind of character.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Oftentimes you see one role as an audition for another.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's intentional on his part for The Martian, but it very much, yeah, it does seem like that. So many British actors, when they want to play Bond, will play all these kind of like cool guys with guns
Hmm.
in advance of auditioning.
Yeah, and then it's actually Daniel Craig playing James Bond, not to play James Bond, but to audition for Benoit Blanc. That was his end goal the
Of
whole time.
course. Well, yes.
Yeah.
It's clear that this is what he wants to be doing.
Yeah,
Hmm.
James Bond isn't the end goal for him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bond was never his interest.
Yeah. Well, so we've touched briefly on sort of like the returning home to a woman, right? Returning back to Penelope. But I also think, because, right, like Nolan classically only has like maybe one female character, but there are a lot of female characters like within the Odyssey as a whole. And so it'll be interesting to see how that happens. Because in a lot of ways, like female characters are Odysseus's obstacles. It's the ocean, right, is the main obstacle to getting home. But then all these interactions he has with women, right? Like he has to interact properly with Nausicaa to get in good with the Phaeacians. Almost all the monsters except for Polyphemus are like female monsters. And then, right, like you can almost see Penelope as the last obstacle to returning home or to returning to the self. because she has to be the one to accept him into the home. And if he doesn't do that correctly, like Agamemnon doesn't do it correctly, you end up dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he tries to maybe portray all those women, the multiplicity of women, but also balancing like the, when he Odysseus comes home and he kills all the maids in his home.
Yeah.
Like even I don't know, like on this reread we're about to do,
Hmm.
that's something I really want to pay attention to is like just the way that he interacts with women and how you can square like putting the women up on pedestals, but also like killing all the maids. Like, yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I that is the moment where you're reading it in eighth grade or whatever, and they're like, and then he kills all the women, and you're like, oh, ooh, like he kills the suitors, he kills like 40 dudes,
Mhm.
and you're like, yeah, those guys, and then he kills all the maids, and you're like, whoa. I think they're either gonna skirt it completely, they're gonna do one of three things. They're gonna skirt it completely, probably most likely. Although Mia Goth,
Mhm.
it was cast as one of the maids.
Yeah.
So I think potentially they're going to make the maids really like awful and like against Penelope and like conniving and will
Mhm.
betray. Like I think Mia Goth will probably primarily be the character on which they heap these kind of like, frustrations and grievances for his house being overturned. She'll sell out Penelope in some way for the suitors to, like I think that's most likely what's going to
Mhm.
happen. Um, or it's going to be some super fucked up thing that happened, and we're all like, "Oh, yo,
Yeah, I mean the most positive option might be the Margaret Atwood Penelope ad version where like the maids are scheming on behalf of Penelope with Penelope's permission and they're like working with her, but then Odysseus sort of like doesn't get that memo and he just sees their actions and kills them, not knowing that like Penelope had been orchestrating all of that. I think I really like the Penelope ad that Margaret Atwood did as a different version of that that makes it more tragic, where it's like Odysseus was wrong to do this, but also like it was this sort of understandable lack of communication because Penelope herself had also been sort of conniving and they just like didn't figure out that they were
yeah,
both conniving
maybe,
in different ways.
Mhm.
maybe, yeah." I mean, isn't Penelope there when he's like, "Kill them all"? Like isn't like
Yeah.
Telemachus to a degree involved in
Oh
Mhm.
that?
yeah, yeah. He's like, this is our first act as father and son. We're gonna get in there and we're gonna kill everyone together.
Yeah,
Like,
this is they talk about how men need a strong male role model. Telemachus perhaps was raised in the alt-right at home, it seems. I just want to like reflect on one thing, Bella, that you said, which was the idea that like Agamemnon not, handling his homecoming effectively well. And I mean, for Iphigenia just getting like absolutely like slaughtered and all that. There's a book called A Thousand Ships. I don't know if
Mhm.
you guys have read it.
I've seen
heard
it
of
in
it.
bookstores but haven't read it.
A Thousand Ships is the like the it's basically the all the women involved in the Iliad, and
Mm.
it's just the degree to which they only all the chapters are from the point of view of the women involved in it's the Trojan women. Penelope is involved. Like all these we get letters from Penelope and stuff. It's very interesting, but there's a section in it which I think is the best section in the book where they basically talk about the idea that so oftentimes when you win a war, you become so obsessed with the idea of winning a war that you realize that you've sacrificed absolutely everything in pursuit of winning it, and you
Hmm.
don't realize that you've lost the war until you come home.
Yeah.
I think something that is so interesting about the Odyssey is finding out that like every single person involved was completely and absolutely destroyed by their victory.
Mhm.
Like the idea of like we see them succeed in the Iliad and completely like dominate Troy. And then the Odyssey, we get the aftermath in which all of them are completely and absolutely, devastated by what they've given up to win that war.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Um, like the only person I can think of who comes out on top from the Greek side is Menelaus.
Hmm.
Because he and Helen are just like, all right, we're back together. It's like when like your most toxic friends get back together and you're like, I
Mhm.
guess we just gotta not say anything,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I will say though that aspect is another reason that I have hope for Christopher Nolan because that's the same thing that Oppenheimer was about. And I think
Yeah.
that movie did that super well of like the cost of this sort of ambition,
Mhm.
both on like a societal level, that last scene of like we have destroyed the world, and then on a personal level, like you see what it does to Oppenheimer himself and that. And I think Christopher Nolan is aware of that dynamic at play that like ambition can be great but can also like eat away at us and what is the cost of our grand adventures.
Mhm. It's also kind of it reminds me of like the scourging of the Shire at the end of The Lord of the Rings. When you go home and realize, oh, the final battle I have to fight is like reintegrating myself into the home. And even the home wasn't untouched by the war.
Yeah, and going back to your earlier point about the women and being interested in how, that'll play out and even just reading it, paying attention. I remember the first time I taught the Odyssey with students, one of the first like moments of like questioning Odysseus is actually very early on. The first time we see him after we get all Telemachus' stuff, he's on Calypso's island and he's been there for like 5 years and he's like crying on the beach
Mhm.
looking out at the ocean. He wants to go home. It's like, but you've been here for 5 years. You've never tried until now. Like, it seems like maybe he's kind of happy, like chilling with Calypso and sleeping with her for 5 years, and he stays like for a year with Cersei. Like, there are all these times where I think we have to question, and it's easy to question, like, how eager is he to get home? Because there are many times where he does seem to intentionally, like, oh no, let's just like stay here. It's pretty nice
Mhm.
here. Oh, now it's time to leave.
Yeah, yeah. The female characters sometimes feel like they're almost the solution for a second, and then they become the obstacle for
Yeah,
him. And they go back and forth between being those things.
yeah.
Yeah. Kyle, would you like to give kind of your like advice to someone who is going to
Mm.
read the Odyssey for the first time?
Something that the myths kind of very, I mean, like I think just based on the way that storytelling is like happens, throughout the years and like all the translations and everything, they do not to a degree examine like the internality of a character very often. And so like I think that something that I always like I would recommend if you're reading the Odyssey for the first time is when you read Odysseus, constantly ask yourself what he's thinking about versus what he's saying.
Yep.
And like if you imagine that this is a character who is impossibly tricky and it like impossibly devious and like is arrogant, like it has a lot of hubris, constantly ask yourself, is what's being said aloud the truth? Like realize that there are layers and upon layers and upon layers to pull apart constantly.
Hmm.
Like and I mean like, you see this because, like many people, myself included, have like kind of like spent their whole lives, returning to the Odyssey. And I think it's because you can always return to it and like you like wonder what exactly Odysseus wants here, what exactly he's thinking about. And I think not fully understanding it or getting there is the point.
Hmm.
You know, complicated man of many turnings. The idea of having this character be a thing that we all are kind of constantly reckoning with, like the mystery of that is to a degree the reason to return to it.
Hmm.
Yeah, where like
Um,
if you find yourself thinking, oh, like, yeah, this makes sense, and I have a solid understanding of Odysseus as a character, like maybe you don't. Like maybe
Hmm.
you should
yeah,
think of a different alternative. And I think, and again, in my experience, that's why this book is so fun to teach in a classroom because like any sort of conspiracy theories students want to come up with, like you can kind of go down those lines. Like, well, what if it's this?
yeah.
What if it's this? Like you can actually entertain. Obviously, not all of them are going to have the same weight as others, but like it it invites you into the sort of conspiratorial nature of like how much of this is honest and those kinds of things that makes it really fun to engage with.
And if you think it's simple, you're getting tricked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a part of it,
Yeah.
like if the curation of the story is one of Odysseus's, machinations, one of his creations, like understand the fact that like if you're like, oh yeah, he's, like what you know and believe about him to a degree is part of it for him.
Mhm.
Like the story he tells is part of it. So, like peer through. Yeah, trying to figure out what this guy's all about.
Yeah, and because we just read the Iliad, um, to me, Odysseus is just like always 1,000% more interesting than Achilles.
Yeah.
Because
Like,
Achilles is very simple and straightforward. He
yeah,
has like big emotion and like, I mean, I think that's interesting how his big emotions change, but it's very different. Like you always kind of know Achilles wears his heart on his sleeve. He like tells it exactly how it is, and that's what makes him very interesting, but it's also very sort of one note.
yeah, he's really making one decision the whole book, and it's like between glory or whatever else he wants to do. It's yeah, it's
Yeah.
just
And
it's not interesting for a modern audience too because we see Achilles' choice and we're like, what is glory? Like we don't have the same attachment to that concept anymore.
yeah, and he was not the greatest of the Greeks. Like the implication is that, well, of course, this perfect killing machine is going to, he's not the one who wins the war.
Hmm.
He's quite useful in keeping the Greeks there, but it's Odysseus who ends the war. Which is, I mean, that to me is a degree to which, like that's what they say in this first section here.
Hmm.
He's the one who toppled the holy city of Troy.
Yeah. And he gets to live a long life. Like he gets to die of old age.
Yeah.
Yeah, which no one else gets to do.
Gets the glory and the long life. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also recommend anybody who reads the Odyssey and really likes it, after you read the uh, the whole Odyssey, I recommend the poem Odysseus Dying,
Mm,
which is by Shayla Winfield,
okay.
which to me serves as like a beautiful little kind of like digestive that I read at the end every time I read the Odyssey.
Nice. We'll check that out. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah. I like,
It's it's awesome. I love it. It's very, very short. It's 7 lines.
well, is there anything you want to pitch of your own projects for people to also check out?
Yes. In similar, to similar literary acclaim, my book, How to Piss Off Men, has entered into the world. I'm sure it will endure for as long as Homer's Odyssey itself.
Hmm.
109 things you can say to piss off men. And that's it. And my YouTube show Rabbit. Watch it if you can. If you got 56 minutes to spare.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And
Thanks
we
for having me,
always,
guys.
Yeah. And now I just want to keep talking about the Odyssey. And that's why we started the podcast. I could talk about it for hours. This has been great. So thank you.
I'll
Yeah.
just say it for posterity. Happy reading from me as well.
Well, it was great to have Kyle on the podcast.
Yes, always good to talk to a friend about books that we love.
Yes. Especially to get that keen Hollywood insight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear about like the movie, like from the LA perspective. You know?
Yeah. So if you enjoyed that, and if you have any interest in reading the Odyssey before the Christopher Nolan movie comes out, or if you're watching this in years past after the Christopher Nolan movie is already out, we are going to, starting next week, begin a book by book read through of the entire Odyssey. It will last for 24 weeks, which will end just before the Nolan movie comes out, just one chapter a week. And so we would love it if you would read along with us or just tune in and listen to us break down important themes, characters, questions in each section of the Odyssey. We also just published an episode of our recommendations for which translation to read if you are interested in reading it. We tried to kind of personalize, if you're this kind of person, if you like these kinds of books, you might like this translation, because we know it can be hard to kind of decide. So we try to give some clear-cut recommendations.
Yes.
And one of those recommendations is the Samuel Butler translation, which I'm recording as an audiobook. So we have book one of that available if you want to just listen to me read a translation aloud before the next episode comes out. You are welcome to follow along that way.
Yes, the audiobook of book one will be linked in the video description here. And we also have a Patreon mini podcast. If you are perchance wondering, what do these people read when they're not reading the Odyssey? You can check out on Patreon and find out.
Yeah. So if you are returning to this channel because you followed us on the Iliad journey, thank you. If you are new to this channel because you found us for the Odyssey, welcome. We are excited to embark on this together and with you all.
And until then,
Happy reading.
happy reading.